Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for Habanero's webinar, Don't Break the Bank, Improve Your Mobile Experience with Light Responsive Techniques. My name is Mallory O'Connor and I'm the practice lead for customer and member portals here at Habanero. And also joining me is one of our senior front-end, or as we call them, user experience developers, John Allen. Today in our session, John and I will be covering two main areas. First, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what light responsive is and why it might be a fit for your organization. And then John will walk you through some of the details about how the approach works, and we'll be using a case study as an example. So before we jump into the content,
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone. I think we just had a little hiccup with some of the audio, but I think we're ready to get started. Thanks for joining us and for sharing your time with us this morning on our webinar, Don't Break the Bank, Improve Your Mobile Experience with Light Responsive Techniques. My name is Mallory O'Connor, and I'm the practice lead for our customer and member portals here at Habanero. Also joining me is one of our senior front-end or user experience developers, John Allen. And today in our session, John and I will be covering two main areas. First, I'll be spending a little bit of time talking about what light responsive is and why it might be a fit for your organization. And then John will walk you through an example of we'll walk you through some of the details about how the approach works and use a case study as an example. Before we jump into the content, though, there's just a few quick logistics. We're trying out this new format, which is sort of the coffee break style webinar. So it's a 30-minute time frame, which hopefully allows you to step away from your day-to-day without being as big of a time commitment. So today's session will give us about 25 minutes of content, followed by a Q&A period. For the Q&A, we'll be using the question features to capture your questions and feedback throughout the session. Our colleague Chris Anderson will be monitoring the questions for our Q&A. If we aren't able to get to all of them at the end of the session, we'll certainly follow up with you directly after the webinar. So, and quickly, for those of you not familiar with Habanero, this is why we exist as a company. We strongly believe that together with our clients, we can have an impact to help create great workplaces. And we've been pushing our focus beyond simply providing good technology solutions and more towards impacting our clients' business with technology-enabled change. We do this through our work on customer portals and websites, employee portals and intranets, and also on our member portals or extranets. So for the past 17 years, we've seen the impact of well-designed portals and that it can have on both employee and customer experiences. So we're super excited to share our perspective and our experience working with clients to leverage an existing website and content to create a better mobile experience, all without a massive investment financially. I think this concept will be of interest for organizations that have a fully responsive website on their roadmap, but perhaps that project is a ways off in the future. Light responsive is a compelling interim solution for a better mobile experience. And given that we don't have a ton of time with you today, we don't want to get into a long list of cited studies or analytics to confirm what we pretty much know is the obvious. Mobile traffic is increasing at a rapid rate year over year, and it's not uncommon for us to see figures in the high 20s as far as share of mobile traffic for our client sites. The result of this is we're seeing pressure from all of this high device adoption on our clients to create a better mobile experience. Before I jump into defining light responsive, perhaps I was thinking we should spend just a minute reviewing some of the mobile experience fundamentals. A key decision when we're developing a mobile experience is to determine whether it will be a mobile web experience or mobile application. In past webinars, we've spoken in detail about the mobile app landscape, so today we're really going to focus more on the mobile web experience. Within that mobile web spectrum, you have three mobile experiences: the dedicated mobile website, a responsive website, and what we're calling the light responsive website. With the dedicated mobile, or the first generation M.dot scenario, the mobile site was a separate site with a subset of content for key business scenarios. If a mobile device was detected, The user was redirected to a mobile site, often with a link that said back to full site. This was a relatively low cost and first step to get into mobile and allowed organizations to provide a mobile experience accessible across the device landscape. But this approach has its limitations. You're choosing a subset or some limited functionality that makes assumptions about mobile scenarios, such as which content you might want to see while you're on the go. The solution really predated the usage patterns we're now seeing that dominate mobile, where we're using our devices as much or even more on our sofas than we do on the road. This approach has then given rise to the responsive site, a development approach that uses HTML and CSS to create these fluid and flexible layouts that adapt content, functionality, and navigation based on resolution targets. Its advantage over the dedicated mobile experience that we just saw is that it's a single point of access and content across all devices, which really means that you're relying on a single source of content and a unified user experience regardless of the device, from desktop to tablet to mobile. And this approach has gained traction with net new website solutions, which is great for organizations that have the budget and the plan for ground-up redevelopment. But what are the options for an organization that may be 6 or 12 or 18 months away from a new solution like this? This is exactly where we see light responsive coming into the picture. We should perhaps state that light responsive is a term that probably isn't commonplace across the industry. We're using it as a way to describe an adaptive approach to mobile web experience, an approach that really layers regular web technology onto your existing site to adapt it for an improved mobile experience. It doesn't rebuild, but rather it extends the site to drastically improve the majority of mobile experiences. Leveraging your site's existing code, CMS platform, and all existing authoring processes, the light responsive framework detects devices and delivers an alternate layout that's better optimized for mobile. Content, interactions, and navigation are all reprioritized and adapted for a more compelling experience, all without touching the site's backend code. We thought that for participants today who are attending the webinar, you might find some of the following scenarios ring true for you and may make light responsive solution a good choice for your organization. So light responsive is an approach that's well matched when you have access to limited funds. It could be that you don't have a budget approved for a complete overhaul in 2014, but you have some budget for incremental improvements. With a light responsive approach, you can create an improved mobile solution with an enhancement level budget. Or perhaps your company has gone live with a relatively new website that maybe due to budget or timeline reasons didn't include a mobile experience. Now that it's out in the wild, there really isn't any immediate appetite to start from scratch and rebuild with mobile as a priority. Light responsive is an ideal way to address the timeline gap and extends the investment in your existing website until you're ready to tackle a stem to stern, fully responsive site. As a bonus, extending your site with a light responsive approach doesn't require a huge time commitment from the business or necessitate any adaptation of content, which may really help build buy-in for a mobile solution sooner than planned. And light responsive can help you solve the pain of an underperforming mobile experience. You might be getting negative feedback directly from customers, or maybe off property through social channels, or are experiencing other indicators of dissatisfaction, like increased mobile bounce rates or reduced mobile conversions. Light responsive allows you to make an immediate and measurable improvement on brand satisfaction and conversion. There are some real benefits of adopting a more effective mobile experience with a light responsive approach. You can see the results of light responsive much faster than by undertaking a complete site overhaul. We expect that most public-facing sites could see a mobile solution in place in a matter of weeks. It's also cost-effective. As most of us know, projects get super costly when you start developing and affecting back-end systems. Our light responsive approach relies on front-end development changes that have no impact on the existing desktop experience whatsoever, and this keeps development and QA costs to a minimum. There's no impact or additional overhead to content authors, no additional publishing steps, training, or even any new processes required for authors to generate great mobile content. It's high impact, so they say you never get a second chance to make a first impression. We see light responsive as a viable interim solution to improve brand perception, increase customer satisfaction, and keep your internal stakeholders happy. So now that you've had a bit of an overview about what light responsive is and why it may appeal to your business, John's going to give you a high-level overview to how it works.
Thanks, Mallory. Okay, so how does this work? As we know, our goal is to improve user experience, but at the same time, we don't want to impact the existing site. So we make our changes by layering new CSS and JavaScript onto what already exists in such a way that it can only affect mobile devices. Mallory talked about a bit about the problems that can arise when viewing a desktop site on a mobile device. The first issue that we'll look at is layout. On a mobile device, desktop layouts often appear very small, which makes them difficult to read. To fix this, we need to rearrange the content. Here you can see that the main text of the page is much larger. We've reduced the number of columns from 2 down to 1, and that gives us a lot more room to increase the font size and space out the lines for easy reading. Of course, you'll notice that the right-hand column is no longer visible, but don't worry, we haven't just deleted it. Instead, we've moved it down below the main content. This is a balance between visibility and legibility. While it may not be as prominent, we now have enough room to make it easily readable. Okay, let's also talk about navigation. We run into much the same problem with navigation as we did with the page content. It's not legible and it's difficult to interact with. There are many approaches to mobile navigation, but in this example we've decided to use a menu button. You can see here that the individual links are hidden by default, but expand when the button is clicked, giving you easy access to the rest of the site without taking up space when you're not using them. With the layout and navigation now squared away, let's take a look at something which can be a bit more complicated. Specialized features, web parts, or widgets are great for adding interactivity and depth to a page, but making them function equally well on a variety of devices can be quite challenging. Interactions designed for a mouse and keyboard don't always work well with our much larger and less accurate fingers. You can see the photo gallery here has small images which wouldn't give much detail. Also notice the tiny buttons. With a mouse, those would be easy to click, but with your fingers, it could be a lot harder. But if we were to show only one image at a time and increase the button size, this gallery becomes a lot more useful. Depending on the complexity of each individual feature, it may not be within budget to modify them all for mobile. If this is the case, there are other options. If the content is deemed not important, we may be able to just hide it for users. Or, in the case of an image gallery, another option would be to extract just one of the images and embed it directly into the content, as you can see here. Other types of features will have different solutions. Each will need its importance, complexity, and possibilities assessed individually. There is no one right answer. This may not seem like an ideal plan, but remember the goal here is a light solution designed to fit within a specific budget, so compromises may have to be made. So far we've talked about the visual and interactive side of the light responsive approach, but we have not talked about performance. Performance is key to a successful mobile interaction. Like it or not, users expect things to be fast. When they aren't, they feel broken and people get frustrated. Large images and other assets designed for the desktop and broadband connections can really slow things down on mobile. While the techniques we described earlier can hide these assets from your users, they cannot hide them from the browser. Your phone will still download them, and so the performance will not be improved. Mobify.js helps us solve this problem. Mobify.js is a JavaScript tool which lets us manipulate the page before the browser really looks at it. We can modify the raw page source on the fly without any changes to the backend or authoring experience. If you aren't sure what I'm talking about, I've got a quick metaphor to help explain. Imagine your page or site is a large textbook. When you're at home, this is no problem. You leave it on your desk, bookshelf, wherever. The fact that it's large isn't really a big deal. But what if you wanted to take it on a trip? Wouldn't it be nice to get rid of the table of contents, the glossary, the extra images, and the chapters that you've already read? You could use whiteout to hide them, but then the book is still just as heavy. That's what CSS does. What Mobify.js lets us do is actually rip out those extra pages, making the book lighter and easier to deal with. If you combine this with our design improvements, and you can significantly enhance what your mobile users are seeing and how they experience your site. Now that you have an idea of how it works, let's take a quick look at a site where these principles have been applied and what the results were. Oil Sands Today is an engagement site developed by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. When the site was designed, mobile was not in scope. While it looks fine on a large screen, all the problems we just discussed were present when it was viewed on a mobile device. Here you can see that in order to read anything, you had to zoom in, and that meant elements got cut off and you lost your context. How did this affect users? One of the symptoms of this poor user experience was a high bounce rate. Most mobile users weren't viewing more than one page, and in fact weren't spending much time on the site at all. Why was this happening? As we talked about, poor user experience can leave people frustrated and cause them to give up. Combined with that, slow performance made the site even harder to use. In our tests, we saw page load times of up to 7, sometimes even 30 seconds. Most of this was caused by large images and extra assets which weren't even being used by mobile devices. But once we had applied our light responsive techniques, we saw significant improvement in all these areas. The layout was drastically improved, moving from 2 or 3 columns depending on the page down to 1, making the content legible and much easier to consume. The navigation was no longer wasting space, but easily accessible when you needed it. And if you'll excuse the scale of this screenshot for a second, you can see how the entire page layout is now more appropriate for a mobile device. The other half of this is the performance issues we discussed. And here too, we were able to make significant improvements. 50% fewer files are now being requested per page, going on average from 40 down to 20. We also achieved a huge drop in the bandwidth, which leads to much faster pages, which don't leave people waiting for the content they're trying to read. We were able to reduce load times from the 7 or more seconds we saw in testing to 1 second or less, which is a huge improvement, far less likely to frustrate users. Between these performance improvements and the layout enhancements, you can imagine how much better the user experience would be. Users are going to see a site designed for their device, which is much easier to use and much faster to load. Plus, none of our changes are going to impact the existing authoring experience or desktop site. Because of all this, we believe the light responsive approach can have a huge impact on a dissatisfying mobile experience. Now I'll hand it back over to Mallory to wrap things up. Thanks for listening. Mallory?
Great. Thanks, John. Before we get to some of the questions, I wanted to share a couple of key takeaways that I hope you picked up on from our discussion today. One of them, I think, really the message that we want to communicate is that light responsive truly is and can be a fast, affordable interim solution that can help you improve your mobile experience. I think the emphasis really on interim is something that we can focus in on. And mobile second can be okay too. I think that sometimes people, or the dominant way of thinking is really that mobile first is the only way to go. It's definitely the ideal way to go. But when you have an investment in your current portal and you're not ready to tear that down and start from scratch, there's certainly ways that you can evaluate your business needs, leverage all the assets that you already have, and craft a high-impact mobile solution for your organization. And so if you have this investment and you have that timeline gap between where you'd like to be and where you are today, I think that light responsive can certainly help fill that. So we can help you get started if you're in that scenario. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. One of them is really to talk to your organization and talk about the value of a light responsive approach and how you can get your team to understand how that can help you get to where you want to be and create a better mobile experience and tie that to your organization's goals. Perhaps we could be a little bit more tactical. We could assess your website's current issues in the mobile experience through a variety of means, such as listening labs or speaking with your stakeholders, evaluating the feedback that you're getting, looking at your analytics, all of these things can help us to understand where to get started and how to deal with the mobile experience challenges that you have today. And we can help you take that first step forward towards improving your site's mobile experience. So we've got a few questions that have been coming in, and I think that Chris has been gathering them. I think the number one question that we've been getting is, so how much does it cost for a typical light responsive solution? So, I mean, it's like any website project, it's kind of the classic question. It kind of depends, but I think it depends on the complexity, as it would with any website. You really have to determine the complexity of the interactions that you're looking at, and how you're adapting them, how many you're adapting, and the number of templates that the site is using. In our example that we showed was a fairly straightforward number of templates. We really only had a few to work with. And so in order to keep this in the principles of being fast and affordable in terms of the sort of investment that you would like to make for an interim solution, we would really recommend focusing on sort of trying to make those decisions about not going too far in terms of the complexity of the interactions and the number of templates to support. But, with that in mind, we would see a light responsive site, maybe getting started with that, a few templates. Maybe you could get started for a couple of weeks worth of investment or time, maybe sort of a $25,000 and up kind of investment. And that could be live in a matter of weeks. So you could really get your mobile experience making a big step in the positive direction relatively quickly. Another question that we've been getting, and maybe this is one I can direct to John, and that is really about, is the solution technology agnostic? Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, because all of this, all these changes actually happen in the user's browser, it really doesn't matter what sort of platform your website is built on. I think in our case study, that particular site was built on SharePoint, but really it could support any type of website, whether it was built on a CMS or not. Really the only sort of limitation is on the browser side. So old browsers such as IE6 and 7, even IE8 and 9, I think, are not supported, but really that doesn't have a big impact on what we're trying to do because those browsers are not available on mobile devices. So any modern mobile device should support this solution. That would include iPhones, Androids, Blackberries, and new Windows phones as well. I mean, this is one of the reasons that this is a great solution, is that we're not, like we said, it's got nothing to do with the back end, so it doesn't tie into any of your existing technologies. It's really just leveraging the technology that your users are interacting with, which is basically just their browser.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your question. I got another one, actually. It's probably for you, John. So just in terms of understanding, this participant wants to understand why we would go through the process of making all these adjustments rather than taking that time to move to a full responsive site. So why is this actually a productive solution?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Probably the biggest reason to take this approach is around what Mallory was talking about, and that's because this is more of an interim solution. If you have a large web property, starting from scratch and rebuilding it out as a completely responsive solution can be a large investment, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, and that's great if you have the time to do that. But in the example, like our case study, they had recently launched their site and they didn't want to start again from scratch. So this kind of allowed them to get that improved mobile experience in the short term, and as they're planning out or waiting to get to that time when they have the money to sort of start over from scratch and rebuild a fully responsive site. So I think that's probably the biggest reason to take this approach. I think if you had the time and budget to really go all out and do something from scratch, then this probably wouldn't be the right approach. But if you're sort of stuck in between releases, then this can really help out.
Great, thanks, John. And so I've got two more questions that we might have time for here. One is just wanting to discuss the idea of a hybrid solution here, and starting with sort of the creating a light responsive site or a responsive site for just the high use or high volume traffic pages, and then retrofitting the rest. Any thoughts about that sort of potential direction of kind of a hybrid?
Yeah, I think that you could probably work out some kind of a hybrid solution. I think ideally you would be trying to address your entire site. Because we're not doing a lot of redirection here, you might run into, there might be some questions around like what happens when I'm on a mobile device and someone attempts to view one of those pages that you're not trying to cover off. What would happen there? Would we want to like redirect them to some sort of other page, or would we just show them the older desktop version? I mean, that could be possible. I definitely think that you could work in that direction, but we'd have to assess exactly how we were going to handle that situation. But you know, another option might be to have a very basic template that you could apply globally to all the lower traffic sites, lower traffic pages, and then take more time and care with the high traffic pages to really optimize the experience on those ones.
And people are also seeming to be quite interested in the average time frame for an implementation. So, yeah. I mean, I think I sort of touched on that a little bit, that depending on the complexity of the interactions and the adjustments that are being made in combination with the number of templates that need to be supported will really dictate the duration of the project. But, you know, for a simpler site, you know, like we said, you could do something in a matter of a few weeks. Yeah. I would say around the 3-week time frame. And that includes testing and go live. So, and you can go from there.
Yeah, it really is about having good decision making around some of those more complex sort of interactions and features. And in the webinar, we talked about you know, the photo gallery. So that kind of interactive piece, this photo gallery, if you have a lot of those types of features that go beyond just basic content of photos and text, that's where you can start to see, or that's where you can start to need a bit more time to make those things work. But there can be sort of the more complex solutions where you're actually making that photo gallery really work the same way that it would on a desktop with the access to all the same images. And then there's the simpler solution where, you know, maybe you pluck out that first image and just put that directly into the content. So you're still getting that first image, you're still getting some context, but you're not getting the full level of interactivity that you would on the desktop. You know, and maybe in some other cases, as with the case study that we showed, they determined that, you know, the big banners that they had at the top of the page, those weren't terribly important. They were kind of nice to have on the desktop, but in the time frame and within the budget that they had to look at sort of re-engineering that and looking at how we provide, you know, better versions of those photos for mobile, they just decided, you know what, this isn't that important for our mobile users to see. It's not the main content of the site, so we're just going to eliminate that from the mobile view. So there's a lot of different options, but I think, yeah, you can, you know, if you're willing to make certain sacrifices or you know, trade-offs is maybe a better word. I think you can definitely keep the time frame nice and short. But again, I mean, you're going to have to assess based on your particular web property what kind of pages you have and that, just all the details that come into your site.
Awesome. Thanks for that, John.
Yeah.
So we do have a few more questions that have come in. We're going to have to wrap up on the webinar at the moment, but what we'll do is we'll follow up directly with anyone whose questions we didn't get the opportunity to speak to right now. I just wanted to wrap up by letting you know that we've included some links here to some resources that you might be interested in, including past webinars that Habanero has put together, one on fully responsive design, which may be of interest to people attending today, and some of our other mobile experiences and mobile app experiences. We also have, this webinar was based on a series of blog posts that John put together that you'll find at habaneroconsulting.com/insights. That can provide you with a bit more detail that may help answer some questions that you have. And of course, we're very happy to follow. If you want to follow up directly with us, by all means, please reach out. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this webinar today, and thanks for your interest.